Why, hello everyone. It's Monday, January 26th. I'm Mimi Fotz, and this is Hello from the Van. On today's episode, we will be talking about conspiracies, hoaxes, and truths. Oh my. Disclaimer, parents. As always, this is an educational podcast and not a political one. This topic is being approached from a very neutral viewpoint. Where you choose to take the discussion from here is up to you. And with that, let's get into it. As we know, each topic for all of our podcasts starts with a question, normally a question from my kids or a question that I have while I drive my van. Well, today's topic is a little bit of both of those things. You see, we recently had an extended family dinner and conspiracy theories were casually mentioned, and this began a heated discussion amongst the adults. Have you ever been in a room and you can't quite figure out why all of the adults seem so upset, but you know that something is wrong? So you ask the adults and you say, "What's going on?" And then one of the adults says, "You'll understand when you're older." Yeah, this was one of those conversations, but someone somewhere has determined that I'm the adult in this situation. I didn't quite know how to answer. So I turned to my kids and said, "We'll talk about it on the way home." So on the way home in the van, we talked about that big, difficult conversation. And my kids had good questions. And that brings us to our topic today. What's a conspiracy theory? And how is it different from a hoax, a truth, and a fact? I am aware that these can be big questions if we choose to let them be. If you think about the scientific method, we would be at the experiment and research portion. I will present the information and leave the analysis and discussion up to you and your parents. And with that, why is it important to understand the difference between these four words? To know what a conspiracy, a hoax, a fact, and a truth are. It's important because how we discuss things and being exact in our language matters, not just in our everyday learning, but also in our discussions. Now, let me give you an example from my own life that shows why exactness of language and communicating all of the information is important. There was a time in my life when I lived in London. I was studying at university there. One weekend, some friends and I decided that we would fly to Scotland for a weekend trip. We had a lovely time, and when it came time to fly home, we hopped on a bus. Uber and Lyft did not exist at the time, so no, that was not an option, and we started on our way to the airport. As we started to drive, I asked the driver, "Is this the bus to the Glasgow airport?" He said yes, and that he'd let us know when it was our stop. As we rode, about 40 minutes into our bus ride, I glanced down at the ticket and thought, that's odd. This ticket says Glasgow Prestwick. I didn't see that on the bus stops. Then suddenly I had an idea. Why would the ticket specify Glasgow Prestwick? What if Glasgow had two airports with similar names? I have no idea where the thought came from, but it sounded almost crazy to me. Why would they have two airports with very similar names? So I went up to the driver and I said, "Excuse me, driver, but is this the Glasgow Prestwick airport?" As we were pulling into the airport. He said, "No, you are now 2 bus rides, a train ride, and about an hour and 20 minutes from that airport." You see, when I got on the bus and I said, "Is this the bus to the Glasgow airport?" the driver did answer honestly. And he was correct. But neither of us were functioning with all of the information from my plane ticket. Exactness of language and gathering all of the information was critical in that moment. I was going on the assumption that this was the only airport in that direction of Scotland. If, when getting on the bus, I had said, "Excuse me, is this the bus for the Glasgow Prestwick airport?" well, the outcome would have been very different. You see, my friends and I, we had to run. We ran to catch our next bus, which we only got on because our bus driver flagged him down and said, "Hey, these American girls are lost. Let them get on your bus." We ran to catch that bus, which was then late to the next train, where we then had to run to get on that train. Then we had to catch another bus to get to the correct airport. I am happy to report that we did make our flight on time, and despite the many connections and running around like crazed Americans through train terminals, we arrived back in London before midnight. Correct and full communication matters. Having all of the information when we're learning is critical to our thinking process and how we communicate with others. George Orwell Orwell said that if we can't think well, others will do the thinking for us. And I think that applies to the way that we learn as well. If we can't learn well, others will do the learning for us. And with that, let's get into some definitions. First things first, what is a fact? A fact is something that is objectively true for everyone. If something is objective, that means it's the same for everyone, no matter what they think. A fact is also something that can be proven, seen, or measured. Some examples of facts would be things like the temperature. It doesn't matter how I feel. That does not change the temperature outside. Facts are proven, seen, and measured. The next word we're going to define is truth. You've probably heard truth and fact used interchangeably. Like someone will be, oh, it's so true. That's a truth. It's a fact, man. But they're not actually the same thing. A truth is subjective. So remember how we said that objective means that it's the same for everyone? Well, subjective means that it's up to you, the subject, on what that means. A truth can be interpretive, or it can involve your own meanings, beliefs, values, and experiences. Let me give you an example. If I say green beans are terrible, is that a truth or a fact? Well, for me, it's true. I don't like green beans. I had a bad experience. I don't like green beans at all. For me, it's a truth that green beans are disgusting. But I love Brussels sprouts. Give me Brussels sprouts all day, every day. Give me some asparagus. But for the love, don't give me green beans. Green beans are delicious. Might be a truth for you, but it's not a truth for me. That's the difference. But if we say green beans are green, that's a fact. But if I say green beans are delicious, that's a truth. Have you ever played Two Truths and a Lie? There's a reason it's called Two Truths and a Lie and not Two Facts and a Lie. So I know it's a little confusing, but that's the difference between a fact and a truth. A fact is verifiable and the same for everyone, and a truth is subjective. It can be different for different people. I don't like green beans. You might love green beans. But both of us are telling the truth. And that brings us to our next definition. The definition of hoax. A hoax means something that was deliberately created to deceive or trick. Normally, to deceive or trick to make money. Let me give you an example of a hoax from my childhood. This happened when I was about 7 or 8 years old. My family and I were driving across the West on our way to California, and we stopped at a rest stop. I went in and was looking at postcards while I waited for my siblings to come out of the bathroom, and I noticed a postcard. And on this postcard was the most mythical, beautiful creature I had ever seen in my entire life, called a jackalope. It was a jackrabbit with horns on it, kind of like little antelope horns, and it was the most beautiful thing that I had ever seen. Keep in mind, I was around before the internet. The internet was not a thing. We were still playing Oregon Trail and dying of dysentery, okay? So I had never seen a jackalope before. The postcard not only had the picture of the jackalope, but it also had a very informational paragraph that talked about the history of the western jackalope. And it said, the first man to see this singular fauna specimen was a trapper named George McLean in 1829. When he told of it later, he was promptly denounced as a liar. And I was like, oh, George wasn't a liar. That jackalope is beautiful. So my mom comes out of the bathroom and I was like, Mom, when we're in California, can we go look for a jackalope? And my mom busted up laughing. Why? Because jackalopes are not real. They're not real. It's a hoax. It's done to sell postcards. But in my little kid mind, oh, it was real. Why would they put a whole paragraph of the history of the jackalope if it wasn't a real thing? Well, it was a hoax. The whole purpose of a hoax is normally to sell things. And I had fallen prey to one of the classic blunders of an 80s childhood, the jackalope. And that's what most hoaxes are. They're just lies used to make people money. And that brings us to our fourth and final word of the day, conspiracy. A conspiracy is when a group of people with power are doing something secretly that they shouldn't be doing to gain more power or control. They are conspiring together or making secret plans. The key here is the word secretly. As we've done with each word, let me give you an example. For most of the 1900s, people would discuss the dangers of cigarettes. Cigarettes were advertised as healthy for mothers and children. Those who talked about the harm of cigarettes were called alarmists or conspiracy theorists. Doctors advertised cigarettes saying they were perfectly fine. I had a dear friend, Mary. She was my neighbor growing up and had begun smoking in 1947 at the age of 12. When I met her, she had half a lung left. Everything else had been removed due to lung cancer. I would go to her home and we would chat, and she would do her nebulizer treatments while I dusted. And she told me, Mimi, they said it was okay. Someone lied to me. In 1994, 7 different cigarette manufacturers testified before Congress that they had no idea that cigarettes were addictive and caused cancer. I remember this. I remember it being in the newspaper and watching it on the local news. I remember discussing it and Mary saying, oh, they knew? Look at me. They had to have known. It is a well-known fact that cigarettes are carcinogenic, meaning they cause cancer. It is also a fact that nicotine, an ingredient in cigarettes, is addictive. But for decades, those who said as much were called crazy or alarmists or conspiracy theorists. But who were the people in power behind the cigarette conspiracy? Remember, a conspiracy requires something happening in secret to get more power. Well, one of them was an advertiser. His name was Edward Bernays. He is considered the father of public relations. In the late 1920s and early 1930s, he helped cigarette manufacturers market cigarettes to women. You see, at that time, cigarettes were socially unacceptable for women and were only acceptable for men. Bernays tapped into human psychology using the research of his uncle Sigmund Freud. Bernays presented cigarettes as torches of freedom and had beautiful young women go to the New York Easter Parade in 1929 and openly smoke cigarettes. He started a nationwide push for cigarette girls to be presented at major events. This then influenced other women to view cigarettes as not just a disgusting habit that men participated in, but something women could use that was liberating and fashionable. The campaign was so successful that even Bernays' wife took up smoking. He begged her to stop. You see, the companies he worked for already knew in the 1920s and 30s that smoking was unhealthy, but there was billions of dollars at stake, and convincing women that they needed cigarettes was the crux of all of it. He was brought on to help advertise cigarettes, and he was wildly successful. Later in his life, Bernays would go on to state his deep regret in advertising cigarettes. He died in March of 1995, 3 years before major cigarette manufacturers would be forced by American Congress to pay billions of dollars in damages to 46 different states and change their marketing practices. The words of Edward Bernays, as well as the actions of the U.S. Congress in the 90s, proved the conspiracy that cigarettes were harmful and that tobacco companies were working together in secret to promote something that they knew was harmful, simply to make more money. The conspiracy theorists of the 1900s were proven correct, and others, like my friend Mary, were left with the consequences. So that's our 4 new words for today: conspiracies, hoaxes, facts, and truths. What do you as kids do with all of this information? I'm hoping it will help you understand the world a little better so that when you see something like an AI hoax or a jackalope postcard in a gas station, you will have the words to talk about what you see. As human beings, we try to make sense of the world around us in the best way we know how. Our mind fills in the gaps and looks for patterns. And when you see those patterns, never be afraid to ask questions. Remember the scientific method from last week? It applies to all types of learning, to facts, to truths, to conspiracies, and to hoaxes. For all of them, we question, we hypothesize, we act, we analyze, and we report. In the words of Albert Einstein, the important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. Never be afraid to ask questions. I'm Mimi Fotz, and this has been Hello from the Van. Before I cite my sources, parents, we're on YouTube. Not only is our weekly podcast available there, but we also have study helps, meditation videos, and reset tools for your day, with new meditation videos added each week. Please like and subscribe so you can help our podcast grow. And now to those sources. Today's sources are Roots of Selling Tobacco to U.S. Women by ABC News, published July 3, 2001. Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, 20th Century Tobacco Advertisements by Jeffrey Stein, March 17th of 2014 by the National Museum of American History. How to Lie with Statistics Guy Worked for the Tobacco Industry by Andrew Gelman of Columbia University, published April 27th, 2012. Wordsmith, Word Explorer, and Children's Dictionary, the entries Fact and Fiction. HipPostcards.com, Jackalope in the Wild Desert Tall Tale Humor Postcard. Reader's Digest, 12 Famous Hoaxes That Almost Fooled Everyone by Carrie Bell, updated and published on June 10th, 2025. And finally, the Wikipedia entry, Edward Bernays.